My name is Rasmus Myrup, and I am a sculptor and a visual artist. I work primarily with everything. I work with a lot of different materials, some of which today include sewing in fabric, working in wood, working with metal, but all of this stuff is not necessarily always visible, sometimes hidden a bit. And speaking of hidden, this exhibition is called accoutrements, which is a word English has borrowed from French, obviously, accoutrement. In the English sense of the word, it sort of means all that extra stuff, all that like paraphernalia that is never really at the center of anything, but is always sort of tangential. In fashion sense, it sort of is all the extras, all the accessories, but also metaphorically it can be just anything that's always a part and never a whole. And that's sort of where the exhibition starts out by sort of subverting that a little bit. In this work, for instance, we all know an umbrella. We love to use it when it rains. The second you see a cloud in the sky, you're like, where's that fucking umbrella, right? Like, I need it now. But what is she doing on all the sunny days? What's she up to all the other days of the year? The exhibition sort of takes a stab at sort of empathizing with these objects. We can see there's more to them than their job. There's more to them than what they do. It's, of course, an allegory about something else than necessarily objects, but how can we empathize and see that there's more to something, someone, than what they accomplish, than what their profession is, than what they provide us? And so in that sense, is there more to someone else than just the power relation we have to them? This is not necessarily just an attempt to humanize an umbrella, but also to maybe understand that we have all been treated like an umbrella that needs to perform right now, and then other people didn't care about us the rest of the time. But we're also always doing that to other people at the same time. So it's this back and forth that sort of then collects in this one object. I made this sitting umbrella, as she's called, from scratch. The handle is a vintage object that I got from the Swiss Museum of Fashion. I sort of sewed the entire umbrella from scratch, and inside there's like a steel frame I welded, and I sort of carved out this pointy end to give her the sensation of wearing nice shoes. But what I really wanted was for her to sit here in a sort of majestic way. It's a slightly sort of passive pose. She's sitting here waiting, but at the same time there's something so extremely elegant about her sort of having this slightly cross-legged, attentive posture. I made her out of this like taffeta silk so that she has the presence of someone who's wearing a almost like an operatic costume or something like that. Just like in the rest of the show, I'm aiming to approach these objects, but always try to keep their original intent. Instead of making a tie something completely different than a tie, I want to just push it a little bit to the edge. So it's sort of a ontological study into how, as I said, this thing that is always apart can actually be whole instead, but still remain in its partness. Here, two ties that are sort of a classical example of male fashion from different centuries are decompressing after a long day of having to listen to boardroom meetings or bank loans or whatever corporate thing they've been up to, and finally released from their duties of all this toxic male energy, they can hang here and kind of hold hands a little bit. Ontologically, I needed to push it a little bit, but keep it within the tie existence. So I just kind of gave it a little too symbolical maybe, but I gave them opposable thumbs, which is one of those things that a lot of anthropologists or paleontologists are using to distinguish us humans from other hominids, because it's the thing that makes us able to do a pincer grip, which is what we use for tool use and all these things. Just the little gesture of giving them opposable thumbs, you're saying quite a lot. It also made it possible for them to hold hands. One of them has a hand in his boyfriend's pocket, or however that works. The object tie is one of these objects that is named after an action. And what do you do when you're no longer performing the action that you're named after? It's like if I was called artist, like who am I if I'm not producing art all the time? I'd probably am, or hopefully also other things. We know this when like children call their parents by their parental name, like they call them father or mother or parent or whatever. Like they're also a bunch of other things, but in that relation, it's just that exists, and that's a beautiful way of saying it. But the less beautiful thing is when people call the superintendent in the building or the sanitary worker, call them only by their profession, and we sometimes do this to each other. And again, we have it done to us. And this back and forth is what I'm trying to sort of break and escape out of a little bit. So these untied ties sort of still have ties to each other, if that makes sense. I even sewed it so that like the little lining here, the silk I found has printed Rolex watches on it, just to sort of get into the real nitty-gritty of all these like hyper-masculine signifiers, right? There's a fashion historian who's also proposing that ties have become this like extreme symbol of male fashion because they're basically like a long arrow down to the penis. It's a way to sort of just keep the focus in the certain place where you want it. So I thought it was really fun to take all that power out of it, and also to give them this like cute little gesture of also them empathizing with each other. The standing hanger is also a negation of her usual name. A hanger is something that hangs, but what if that hanger is standing? Then you're sort of suddenly negating who she is, or are we? We're maybe seeing a more real version of her when she's kind of having a day off from hanging and she's just kind of standing around, you know? I used the little notches you use to sort of slide a dress strap into to create these folds so that she could sort of look like she's wearing high heels. Instead of this line we have for hanging trousers over, I sort of turned those into spike heels on these pumps. Sometimes reaching simplicity necessitates a lot of complexity at first, and weirdly enough, I had to make like 5 different versions of her until I found this one form, and I finally made her out of this walnut wood with the steel here, and then I galvanized this steel piece from a hanger just to offset the eye a little bit, and again do that thing that I'm attempting to completely subvert the idea of what something or someone is. Much in the same way, our friend over here, this belt that is normally holding in, constantly holding in, keeping up, keeping things going. We all know this person who is constantly responsible, helping out others, being like, yes, I got it, don't worry, I'll bring that to you, I'll fix it. But you know, when do they ever let go? Like when does that happen? So I kind of physically constructed a hand under this belt. I made this like chaise longue, just so that this belt could unbuckle. And again, if you think about it, all the little holes that you would normally buckle, they're here, almost as little buttons on a shirt. And then the buckle is actually unbuckled. It almost looks like he's sort of wearing little headphones, listening to some music. But the little split inside that normally goes through the holes is sort of trying to let go, but it kind of cannot really accomplish the feat. It's also still a tension under. It's not like he is completely actually able to completely relax and unwind. So it's again this like, yes, we want to achieve a kind of leisure or a relaxation, but if the belt probably himself identifies with this idea of keeping in and holding up and making things happen, so who does he think he is without this? Like, how does he know who he can be without being defined by those things, right? So it's not just about releasing them, but also releasing them into this complexity of like, what happens if we're trying to undo this thing? Like if someone is a high power corporate machine, how do they just kind of take that off completely and go on a chill vacation or go to work in a soup kitchen to do something for others? Can they do that if they sort of are constantly wearing this other persona where they're sort of just serving themselves? So it's this constant back and forth. Once again, I galvanized the metal with silver to take it to that level where it also feels like, you know, I wear a little silver necklace around my own neck. So why would he just have a coated steel situation? He probably wants to dress up too, even though it's impractical. Over here is a work where some, sorry girl, but completely useless glasses I bought in a vintage shop in Italy once. These like Chanel glasses that are kind of polarized and have a bit of a gradient going on, but otherwise they're just for looks. She was just kind of lying at my house, not really getting a lot of kilometers of action out there. But also, yeah, once again looked at her and I thought, always stuck on this face. Like, that's the only time you get to go see the world is when you're sitting, resting on these shitty ears and this crappy nose, kind of seeing the world literally with other eyes through you, you know? How could we sort of release her into the wild? So I wanted to give her the ability to sort of walk out into the world on her own volition, and these boots are made for walking, you know? It has this doubleness to it because, like, by having these boots on, we're sort of negating her glassness. She cannot really perform her duties as glasses when she wears these, but she has weirdly been released into retirement or leisurely business. Maybe it's the right time for her. We can finally notice the little rhinestones on her side instead of just occasionally seeing them when I decided to wear the little dresses. I made her these little boots out of bronze, which I guess materially is a bit ironic also because it has this like nice high production value of like little bijou stuff, but they're also way too heavy for her to actually walk. So I guess it's a bit of a material conundrum. At least she kind of looks like she could strut out of here, right? In this room, there's 3 individuals, 3 chapeau chéri, little hat cuties in French, who finally, instead of having to be on top of people's head, can sort of slide down and actually have a face. I sort of imagine that they're sort of sitting here chatting about a long day of work or how, you know, maybe people should wash their hair more often or whatever the troubles of a hat might be. But also hats are a great example of some of the objects that I was working with where there's just a kind of pre-existence in them already. When they are disembodied, when this hat is taken off, there's a different quality to it. If I take my shirt off and put it on the ground, it will sort of just look like fabric there. A lot of these other objects, a hanger, a hat, a belt, they have certain kind of, they almost have a presence that I was drawn to, that there's a different, both material, but also ontological thing going on there. They're a bit more thick with existence and they need a little bit less human inflation to exist. So actually all the works in this exhibition are also inspired by a project I did with the Swiss Museum of Fashion and the Centre d'Art Contemporain in Yverdon-les-Bains in Switzerland, where these 2 institutions invited me to jump into their collection of like thousands and thousands of fashion objects. The exhibition I made with them and the project there sort of was what drew me to all these objects, and seeing disembodied hats lie on shelves really shows you the difference of the thickness of presence that's there versus a dress on a hanger. There's a very different amount of existence in these objects. But here, these 3 hats, I've sort of attempted to match each hat with a body that sort of looks like it just slid out from behind. So here, this one is a Y2K era braided grass hat made by an Italian brand. This body is then, of course, made of green grass that I found and dried in 2020, very long time ago. And they will sort of age in the same way. They will be bleached by the sun and have this beautiful little light green, purplish quality to it. I sort of tied it with a fly tying thread to give it this sensation of being both free as a material, but also just kind of kept in, almost like, yeah, our muscles are done in the same way, right? Fibrous. She's kind of like talking, I think. She's very much not able to speak without gesturing. So it's very this like, and then I said, and then they were like, and you were also. And over here, our lovely friend who is listening to all this chatting is, as you can see, slightly bored, or at least maybe paying attention. He's made with flint that I napped. Kind of looks like plated shoulders, or again, this slightly bored gesture that is carving into the hat itself. And this hat is my old cap that has also had a bit of wear and tear, but weirdly enough, the colors in this, they're all the same kind of colors that are present in the flint. So I thought it was a nice little match. It's from a trucking company called Scania. But hats also belong to this kind of fashion historical universe where, for instance, this hat, the base hat, is hand braided in the 50s. and the trimmings are actually made in the 1930s, and then it was put together by a hat maker in Switzerland. The beautiful craftsmanship and the craft tradition of hat making really was peak. If you think about all the little historical hats you can think of in your head, were all kind of extra. You know, they were all like a lot. And people would often only have one or two hats, but they would still choose like the really incredible ones. There was a lot of personality in this. And again, I think that personality shows when the hats slide down into this different posture. And right now, obviously, she's sort of texting on her phone, maybe waiting for someone who's in the bathroom or something like that. I made her body out of reed flowers that are usually in these kind of swampy, wet areas. And then her tiny hands and her little backside here are sort of gradients of pine cone scales that I individually sort of cut off and glued back together. Because I think all this lovely looseness needed a bit of contrast, material contrast with this harshness. And also it made me able to make this super nice, again, opposable thumb so that she could text on her tiny phone. So weirdly enough, like I ended up kind of figuring out that there was a perfect little fingernail shape in these pine cone scales. So it's perfect for this little texting. I think for me, one of the most beautiful things about being a human is the complexity of it, that it's never easy or simple. And in that way, trying to remember that everyone else around us is just as complex as we are on the inside is both something that we should always remember and try to forget sometimes, because we can get so overwhelmed by constantly having everyone in our head, but at the same time we need to enact it. So it's this double action, it's this back and forth, this thing where we constantly should be aware that everyone is just as important as we are. Meanwhile, we're navigating a world where we can only perform actions as ourselves. So it is this constant back and forth. But I still think that keeping the complexity of others is also going to increase the complexity of ourselves. That we also understand that we can be many different things. You know, like we can be a parent to a child or perform a certain job in a profession, but also have other complexities that make up who we are.